Hello, everybody in a very festive mood. Everybody at home, hello, hello, everybody at home. I'm sure you wish you were at home. Some of you may be at home office, your windowless office, but it's a lovely day outside. Welcome to our December Data Network meeting, our DAAN meeting. We are very happy to have you here. It seems like we have breaks than we used to between meetings, but I know it's always been this case, but I feel like we don't see it nearly enough. So make sure I can advance here. Got a little lag, I think, between our two. There. So we are remaining hybrid, but we have a good crowd here today. I'm happy to. We do have an activity, an extension activity after the main session. So as we've been provide the stuff that everybody needs to know. We provide that to you in the main session. We don't have a lot of interactive time during this time, although we will pause for questions and take questions after party, as we have been determining it internally, is when we're going to have an opportunity to really engage here. And so we try to do that just to incentivize people to come. We know not everybody can come, but also it's so hard having all online meetings. So we're seeing how it works. Half of the team for DAAN, we are a combination of our accountability includes me, Evan Bartelheim, as well as Dr. Hillary Weissman. She's unfortunately out. Roy, who's over here, Karina, who just stepped away, I think, for a minute, and Jeremy, who we're easily compiling all the data that's come in over the last week and a half from the public. He's having a good time. And we also have our assessment unit, my colleague Stephen Bartlett and Sarah Nitsos, as well as Diane, who was busy helping set. Sorry, it's still taking just a second. Okay, so just agenda for today. We are going to provide you with some accountability updates, data updates, all relevant, I think, to accountability. We tried to focus, don't get too in the weeds with CALPADS. We got important stuff that affects the dashboard moving forward that you need to know about. Then some assessment updates, Marcus ETS for an ETS update, and then we'll take a break. We actually may take a little break and then we will do a longer break and come back we'll close out the regular meeting, and then we'll do where we turn off the cameras. We can say whatever we want. We can frolic, have an in-person meeting. The materials for that extension activity are all loaded on Canvas. So if you couldn't be here, you're missing out because you have access to it. We don't record it, but you will get to see all in there, and there's a lot of great resources that we developed for that meeting. Purpose. So, the assessment and accountability network, and this continues to be reinforced by even the state seems to reinforce this. And we just last week, I think it was there was a meeting they put on the CDE and ETS, and it was CALPADS, right? Better together. And it was really the realization that assessment accountability data, they all kind of hand in hand, and you can't exceed shear. They seem to get more and more intertwined. So whether you want to or not, become a CALPADS data expert to some degree to be able to function properly. So we always want to make sure that we have information for you to make your job all coming out of districts where we did assessment, accountability, data, realize, if we could do it a little bit better. I think that's what my driving force whenever we have these meetings is, if I knew then what I know now, what would I have done differently? Like informing conversations with board members, with your educational partners and parents. So those things like that we like to focus. So as always, and I think Karina's already dropped in the chat, meeting materials are all in Canvas. For those of you who are in the room, get you into Canvas. If we haven't sent you a link already, I think there's a Canvas link in OMS. But we have links to virtually everything. Plus in the module for the meeting materials, you'll find a lot of the upload and some that we aren't even sharing, things that just we come across that we think might be helpful for you. Our purpose is always to give you the latest information in our primary area of responsibility. And all, as of yesterday, and I know things change, particularly as relates to the piece of information. We know more stuff is forthcoming from the dashboard, more data. Uh, Data is going to be coming out. But this is as much as we know as of yesterday. If you have questions, please drop pause on a couple of occasions to take questions. Make sure we don't overwhelm you, but and we're unable to answer them in real time. We'll definitely make sure you get the follow up. And even if you do drop it in the chat, we can answer it off, and we'll just in the follow up, because we like to put in links to if it involves any education code or other resources. We like to put the links so you have immediate access. So now to the accountability updates. Thank you for engaging. Hopefully you had a chance to meet somebody new who you hadn't talked to before, and thank you for joining us in the chat. So the dashboard release, yay. All right. I know there's some good stuff out there. So we won't go into great depth. I will say statewide, it was somewhat, expected with a new student group, long-term English learners, which we'll talk about in a little bit, being introduced, right, in a group that we know has a lot of challenges, that there could be, a lot of tough dashboards this year. And there were for some places. Overall, the number of districts that were identified for differentiated assistance dropped across the state. And it actually dropped here, not by a lot, actually, but we had a number of our districts who are eligible. They're still eligible because it's a 2-year process, but they weren't eligible this second year. But then a number of new districts, or maybe districts who'd been with us before, came on board, many of them for LTELs, and I'll give you some numbers in a little bit. But just some of the things that are available now, because the full dashboard, when you think about it, it gets released and then we kind of forget about it, but there's a lot more still coming out. But we have obviously the landing page for your schools, and then the equity reports. That's a big piece of it. There is a new piece I just wanted to point out here that, it came about apparently because of a lawsuit, but there is this new multi-year, if you're looking at ELA or math, there's this new multi-year graph that shows your all students growth over time. So, we will be providing our districts with some multi-year stuff, as we always do moving forward with differentiated assistance, and we'll share that with you here. But, this is a new twist, and they're always kind of updating. So we'll see, maybe more stuff will come up on the dashboard, which might be helpful like that. It'd be really cool if you could look at your student groups across multiple years as well. But that's for another day. As far as what's available in the additional reports, this is actually, when you think about the dashboard, keep in mind there are always multiple users being considered when the state is pulling the dashboard together. So that first landing page is really designed for everybody, for parents, for school boards, for your community, to kind of get a sense of how's this school doing. It certainly highlights equity with the equity reports. But if you really want to get into the weeds, you want to get down into the additional reports. And this is a feature that, not everybody gets to. There's actually a separate landing page. But right now on the additional reports page, you have all your 5x5 reports for the state indicators. And if you look closely, you'll always find the detailed data view. And that'll take you down to these amazing tables that have a lot of information, including if you had lowest obtainable scale score penalties applied to your loss, and it'll give you the data even if you didn't get a color, it's status and change for those student groups that have 11 to 29 students. So helpful stuff. The student group report, which is that multicolored report in the upper right. I always love this one. We used to use it a lot for the LCAP team because it gives you that kind of view at a glance of how everybody did relative to all students, and you can kind of see very quickly. It's also helpful if you're trying to discern, and we'll talk about TSI in just a bit, but that's a good one to figure out, okay, is this group eligible for TSI, or the school eligible for TSI for this group? It'll give you a quick understanding of that. And then the graduation rate additional report, which just kind of, it's a table, kind of breaks down your student groups. But there's more coming. So one thing, this isn't going to be on the dashboard per se, but for those of you who have schools that maybe were identified last year for comprehensive support and improvement or additional targeted support and improvement, Whether or not they exit, you may have already been able to determine that yourself. But if you just wanted a confirmation, the state has said they hope to have the ESSA state file, which has the exits for ATSI and CSI, as well as any schools that are identified for TSI. That should be coming out hopefully by next week, I'm guessing. But stay tuned. They did say that's tentative, but they really wanted to move it up. That'd be like almost a month and a half sooner than last year. Additionally, in January, the growth model data for grades 4 through 8 that uses the 3 years worth of CASP data will be released, and that'll be in the additional reports. It's not just going to be a file. Last time it was just a data file. There's actually going to be an interactive component, so that'll be really helpful. I plan on joining a meeting, I think later this week, with the state, and I know they're going to be putting on some webinars. This will be really, I think, of great interest to you, not the least of the reasons why, because there may be a possibility that this growth model data gets incorporated in the dashboard at some point in the future. So good to be familiar with it, and we'll talk about it here for sure. But look for that in January. Also, we know that the DAS, the alternative school status, it no longer is used for accountability purposes, but the state continues to produce it for those schools that were identified for DAS. So the 1-year graduation rate report will be published. They say spring, I'm guessing around February, as well as, and these are the kind of like, this could change tomorrow. I'm not 100% sure. They may come out sooner, but some of the tools we like to look at, the college and career levels and measures report. That's always handy to see where students who were identified as prepared, how they were prepared, and also those students who were approaching prepared. It maybe help to identify where you can focus some attention to move more students into that prepared category. We also will get the academic, the CASP, ELA math, as well as the LPAC, the participation reports, which will give you the breakdown. Like if you had any groups that didn't meet the participation rate, there'll be a quick breakdown on where they were. That's always pretty helpful as you head into the assessment season to bring in a greater focus on those areas that you need to shore up in terms of test administration. And then finally, it's kind of a one-off report, but because it's part of the LCAP, the students meeting UC or Cal State requirements, as well as students meeting CTE pathway completion, and the combination of the two of them. It was always really hard to figure out. So the state started producing this report, and that usually comes out in the spring, so you can add it to your LCAP. So anybody have LTELs that showed up on their dashboard in a significant way? Do you have LTELs in your school or in your district? Okay, most people did, but just so you know, so it's the 14th student group added to the dashboard. We had 62 districts. I didn't have time to count all the charter schools, but we had 62 districts that had one or more indicators for the LTEL student group on the dashboard. We have some purely elementary school districts that they just technically don't meet the requirements of 7 years, so they don't have, but any school that has K through 8 or any district likely has some LTELs, and you had to have 15 or more for a district, 30 or more for a school. There was an assumption that it was going to be all bad news, and it was not all bad news. I will say, looking around, the graduation rate for long-term English learners was actually pretty good. We saw 64% of our districts were in green or blue for graduation rate for long-term English learners. So that means they probably had a 96% graduation rate or higher. On the English learner progress indicator, another area where you're thinking if they're long-term English learners, they're not making progress on language acquisition. Actually, we saw 47% of our districts were either yellow, green, or blue, meaning they might have had a status level that was medium, but they were making progress, or they were even low and making progress, but there was some progress. So that was generally pretty good. And then of course you had quite a few that were in orange, but we always caution, orange isn't necessarily bad because you could be making progress out of red, right? And making progress. But we did see a few reds there. I will say, of our districts, we saw the academic indicator. That seemed to be the place where the long-term English learners had the biggest struggle. So we had 51 districts in LA County that had red or a combination of red and orange on the academic indicators for ELA and math. So that was definitely an area, and I think my colleague Devin Guerra in the Moss unit and I, we had a conversation. There's all sorts of reasons, and I think this year there'll be a lot of conversations around what supports we can provide for LTELs, and I know my assessment colleagues definitely considering, like, are we providing all the necessary designated supports that we can for our long-term English learners to make sure that the testing environment is conducive to the best outcomes? Because it was really kind of striking. That was where it jumped out, ELA and math. I will say among the districts that were identified for differentiated assistance this year, 70% of them were identified for long-term English learners. Often another group as well, but in some instances, that was the only group that was identified. And all but one of our differentiated assistance districts who had LTELs identified were eligible for the academic indicators. So one had the LP and not the academic indicators, but um, everybody else, if you had LTELs, it was going to be for ELA math. So it's definitely a place that we're going to start looking. Keep in mind, LTELs as opposed to English learners, they don't have the benefit of having the reclassified students included in that count. So, LTELs are just they're straight LTELs. They were at least LTELs at some point during the school year. They may have been reclassified, but that could account for some of the big differences on academic indicators.
Before you move on to the next, we have a question from the chat. Can you please repeat how many students need to be in the group to be counted for LTELs?
Thank you. Yeah, so to be included for LTELs, you need at the school level to have 30 or more, and that includes charter schools. At the district level, it's 15, similar to foster youth and homeless. So if you have 15 or more, and keep in mind that's over 2 years, right? So you had to have had, because you have the prior year's status and then the change. So you had to have 30 if you're at a school, 30 or more in each year. So the academic indicator would have been, you had 30 long-term English learners the prior year and 30 long-term English learners this year. Even though this is the first year they're identified, they actually went back they were able to calculate it using prior year. There's a lot of calculating going on. So they would look back a year and look at all the students who took the CASP the prior year to make sure you had sufficient numbers in the denominator for both years. This is an important feature I think that people need to understand. It's like, I'm not going to go into the differences. There's a web page that I think is incredibly helpful, and I'll point you in that direction in just a minute. But in terms of determining LTELs, this is something that still gets asked quite a bit. So this is the dashboard definition of LTELs, which is quite simply students who are identified as an English learner 7 years earlier, right? And so it is actually a calendar year. It's 2,557 days from the time you're either initially enrolled in a U.S. school or you're identified in your ELAS is changed to English learner. So the factor there is whichever comes first, right? So in some cases, a student may have come in during the summer and done, you can have early registration and test the student on the LPAC. And so they might actually have an ELAS that precedes their initial enrollment date. Alternatively, most frequently, you'll have that initial enrollment and then they're tested within the 30 days. So you may have the first US enrollment date prior. And in some instances, you may have had a student who was initially enrolled in it could have been in a private school initially, or in a public school, but out of state. When they come in and they're tested, you have their US initial school enrollment date from that earlier enrollment. This is the first time they're testing in the California public schools, so they take the LPAC. So they might already be 3 years in, right? So they're looking back at that other one. But you can now use this, and I will say you can go back and figure out who these students are, but also moving forward in CALPADS, these students will be identified. There'll be a separate column that'll identify your long-term English learners, including in the student level reports, so you can see who these students are. And of course, it's constantly shifting now because it's not a school year, so it's not, we roll over as of census day, which is the other definition, uses census day. This is ongoing throughout the year. So a student could be an English learner until April. And then they move into the long-term, they're still an English learner, move into the long-term English learner in April. And then for the purposes of the dashboard, that student would be considered a long-term English learner on any of the indicators for that school year. So It'd be helpful to know who those students are, who those students who are on the brink of becoming those students, so you can provide them with the relevant supports. So there is a new flyer, a couple resources that might come in handy, just to support everybody you're working with and understanding who your long-term English are. So you've got this handy flyer that the CDE put out just a few weeks ago that it actually breaks down who they are by indicator. And that's good to know, just because I'm looking at my graduation rate and I'm like going, wait, I don't know that how do we get 30 students in my graduation rate indicator? Well, if they're a long-term English learner when they started high school and they're in the cohort, even if they're reclassified, they'll still be identified as a long-term English learner upon graduation. So that may account for why graduation rate was better. So some of those students who may have been reclassified in ninth grade may have good outcomes. They were making progress. They're still identified on the graduation rate as long-term English learners because they were in the cohort. Also, this web page, and I posted this in Canvas as well. CDE launched this new web page, and it really tries to break down the difference and this is going to continue to confuse people, but there are these two definitions which are both in EdCode right now that are both still valid. And one is the assessment version, which you see reflected in DataQuest and on the CASP, the test results for California website. And that's the older version of the LTEL. And then there's this one we're just talking about, the accountability version, which is the 7 years. There's obviously, if you put a Venn diagram, most students are going to be, there's just going to be a sliver of students who are in one but not the other. But it's worth looking at that page just to kind of help inform people what the difference is, because it is confusing. It's a lot easier to calculate the dashboard version. It's a little broader, and I think probably safer just to go with that broader calculation. So the dashboard moving forward, lots to look at next year. This 2025, there's a state board will be taking up a number of issues for consideration. One, I see my colleague Anthony Kwan from our STEAM unit is here, STEM unit. The science assessment and its full incorporation on the dashboard. So that includes getting the 5x5s, the cut scores, and then using it potentially for identification purposes for differentiated assistance, as well as for TSI, ATSI, CSI, all those things. So that's all going to be discussed next year at the state board. The possible incorporation, as I mentioned earlier, of that student level growth model. So that's a big one. Like, what could that possibly look like? I know at an earlier meeting this year, the state board expressed interest in that because it's used in a lot of other a similar model is used in a lot of other states, looking at that growth model. And it's very unique. It's kind of allows for an apples to apples comparison of schools and districts that may have significantly different demographics. So that's interesting. There's some of the college career indicator measures. If you're a high school district, this may be exciting because things like internships, which have been collected for a while, now may be included, and then possibly things that could drop out. I know that the state board president, Linda Darling Hammond, is really interested in seeing the seal of, why am I blanking on it? It's the civic engagement. Yes, having civic engagement measured there, included there as well. And then the differentiated assistance eligibility based on CALPADS data submissions that I'm going to talk about that in greater depth in just a few minutes. At the same time that all the data drops, if you like your data, it is a little bit like Christmas Day if you're spoiled, because you get all the data from the dashboard, drops at the same time, and then you get all the data that drops in DataQuest also. And sometimes the two are similar, but I think the DataQuest has a lot more flexibility in terms of if you're looking at it on DataQuest, there's the potential to apply filters and get some intersection of filters. You can look at by race, ethnicity, as well as foster youth or students with disability. You get some views there that you can't get elsewhere. But we got the 4 and 5 year cohort graduation rate dropped, chronic absenteeism and absenteeism by reason, which one of the benefits here is you can also look at it by grade level, which you don't necessarily see on the dashboard. Suspension and expulsion rate, the stability rate, which is that factor that's used in the identification of the equity schools for the LCAP. So that's being released. The cumulative enrollment data file, so that's year-long enrollment, and the restraint and seclusion data files. So some of the special ed data will be published. There's a new DataQuest update that kind of gives you a little bit more detail about each of these reports. And the downloadable data files are all available at that link. We frequently go there, and if you have anybody on your staff who can play with data, those are really helpful to go in and manipulate those if you want to look at anything in greater detail. And then this is new, and I just noticed this the other day. There is a data. They're going to publish a DataQuest highlights for the true data nerds, and it's expected to be posted at that link later this week. So that will just be kind of a broad overview, but I think it's like the unsung hero. It's been around for a long time. People take it for granted, but it's a great data source. And I think if you're a school site leader, it'd be great to have this and a working knowledge of it. So a few things that have popped up in DataQuest that I want to point out. We know last year that we moved transitional kindergarten became an actual grade level as opposed to just a program in CALPADS. So that will actually be reflected in a number of these reports. There'll be either a filter or a report view so you can see TK. So in particular, I think a lot of people will be interested in being able to see TK chronic absenteeism, right? And this is something that you wouldn't see on the dashboard, but if you're trying to adjust your programs to address chronic absenteeism, to nip it in the bud, if you will, like being able to break out your chronically absent transitional kindergartners might be a good place to start and to see if that's a bigger issue. Also, your suspension. I sure hope there's not a lot of TK kids getting suspended, but think about my own kids, maybe. I don't know. And the stability rate. So those are all good things that to check out. Another good one, and I'm going to show you the results of this. So the state seal of biliteracy requirements were amended in statute in 2023 for the 23-24 school year. And so those changes were made to make the state seal a little more accessible for all students, to make it a little more equitable. And what you'll find, and I'll show you in just a minute. So they have other means of demonstrating their proficiency in English. And I think a lot of times you came across, if they didn't take the CASP, for instance, they weren't able to demonstrate their proficiency in English. Now that's one of multiple ways in which a student could demonstrate their proficiency in English. So that was helpful. And there's a flyer if you haven't seen it. And I'm saying this because if you weren't aware of these changes, you definitely should be, because it could be very beneficial for the college and career indicator. I mean, it's great for the kids as well, but if you're trying to look for kind of an easier way maybe to move the dial, the state seal by literacy, if you have a lot of students who would be eligible, you might take a look at that. We also have the change to the graduates who are receiving the exemption, the local requirements exemption. So these are students, there are a number of students who fall into this category. It was Senate Bill 532. So foster youth, English learners who transferred in, children of military parents. There are a number of students who fell within this category that you could actually give them a standard diploma for having completed the state requirements as opposed to any local requirements. And this kind of started during the pandemic, if you recall, and they extended it, right? And so a lot of districts that I talked to were looking for ways, can we extend this? And so this allowed a district to extend the option to use this exemption from the local requirements, which seems only fair. Some of these things were like, oh, we have a freshman seminar that everybody has to take. Well, we can waive that, right? And so students could graduate. So the results are pretty telling, right? And so if you look at the graduation, this is just for LA County. You see that we had a 2.3% bump in the graduation rate. And you see also, and of course, I don't know that that's exclusively those students who received the local requirement exemption, because you see the first time there are over 1,200 students who received that local exemption, right? And so I know a lot of our folks in our foster youth program do a lot of presentations around this, because it's not simply, oh, this student graduated. These students have to be provided the information about what it might mean to graduate early, or graduate not early, but to graduate under these separate requirements. They have to be communicating, they have to document it. So it isn't something that you just decide at the last minute, I'm going to let the student graduate. They have to be informed. But because a lot of our schools and our districts know about this, they are doing this. And so you can see there was a nice 1,200 students, but there probably are a lot more who would be eligible for these graduation requirements, which could be very helpful for them. And you can also see we got a big jump in the students earning that state seal of biliteracy. Another great tool to head out into the world with. And just speaking as someone who's right now going through the process of college applications, and that's another good one to be able to put, on a college application. It's also a great skill to have in the work world. So those are all things I think hopefully make that consideration as you're moving forward next year. Maybe these are some areas where you can grow your own school or district. Any questions, Sarah? I was kind of going through a lot of data here.
There was a quick question that said, would TK students start the quote clock for LTELs this year, even though they don't test until next year? Will it start with their EL date or their initial US enrollment date?
That's a great question. It's funny. I would think that the CDE would be pretty forthright about that. This has come up a couple of times as a question. I don't know that that anything will change, but potentially there's been conversation around it. But as of right now, this would start the clock. So that initial US enrollment would be year one, right? Even though they don't test, they're not identified as an English learner. They would, that for the purposes of the dashboard, that would be the start. And I think maybe the reason that there is some hedging there is because maybe there has been conversation legislatively that there may be an interest in making the clock start ticking a year later, since we're not even allowing you to test your TKs. Maybe it's okay to delay it. But I haven't heard anything either way on that. As of right now, yes, that would be the start, because that's the US initial enrollment date would be the TK. Any other questions? Okay. All right. So I've had a few calls about, and it's always like, did we get out? Did we get out? Like, did we exit? And I'm like, well, we can look at the dashboard, right? But so the ESSA assistance file, as I mentioned, should be released sometime this month. And in that, you will find the validation. If you think that you have a school that was eligible for that 3-year identification for CSI or ATSI, keep in mind, they reevaluate every year. So you can exit that CSI, ATSI status. And so if you think, and I talked to somebody the other day, and I'm pretty sure that they did exit for one of their schools that was in ATSI, and it was pretty clear. And there are some other criteria. Those are actually in the dashboard technical guide, but that has not been released yet. But that's something we can talk about next time, just to confirm. But this file will be confirmation when it's released. So additionally, though, you will be schools that are identified for TSI, which we'll talk about in just a second, but it's that interim year. So you may have some schools that even actually exited CSI or ATSI. They are then thrown into the eligibility pool. So you could exit CSI, but then get picked up for TSI. But the demands are significantly lower from CSI to TSI, for example. Not a big shift, though, from ATSI to TSI. It's essentially the same thing. And by which I mean that it's essentially the interim. So it's a 3-year, the CSI and ATSI are the state's support, the identification for additional support that goes in a 3-year cycle that we kept putting off and putting off and putting off because they wanted it to align with the 3-year LCAP cycle. And we just kept missing because of a pandemic and for other reasons. So they finally got it to line up this last year. So they did the identification for the 2023, and that's set. And so I will say the one downside, if you're identified last year for CSI or ATSI, or you had a school that was, you will be on the Williams list because that's fixed. Even if you were to exit, you're still considered for Williams and the Williams visits. However, you would still exit. And then the interim for this year and the next year, we will only be identifying schools for TSI. So you could exit, but you're always eligible for TSI. And the TSI designation is done annually. So you may just be identified 1 year for one group, and the next year they exit, and then you're identified the next year for a different group. But the requirements are slightly less than ATSI. And I know we'll probably be doing something with our colleagues in the state and federal programs unit with regards to ATSI, TSI, and all these designations coming up soon. And just a reminder, because this is where I think you can figure out your own status, right? If you have your dashboard, you can look at school by school. The criterion are the same for 2024 as they were for for ATSI. Keep in mind, there was no long-term English learner student group last year. This is a 2-year criteria. So LTELs by definition could not be picked up for TSI. ATSI and TSI look at 2 years worth of data. So the criterion are all red indicators, which could be one indicator. And that's where you get tricky. If you have a small student group, they might have only one indicator. And if that indicator is red, you would be eligible. All red indicators, except for one. And this can apply if you have only 2 indicators. One could be red, one could be blue. That would still apply. And then the final criterion that's applied is 5 or more indicators, the majority of which are red. So 3 red or even 4 red. And that would be the other criteria. Any of those criterion that are met for at the student group level, and you could be identified eligible for TSI for this year. I saw one hand raised. Yeah. The Williams list, the full list, I do not know. I'll ask our colleague here who oversees that. What still needs to be identified is that other factor, which is based on teachers with the credential in the schools. There's 2 factors. It's the CSI, ATSI, so we know that, but then there's also a calculation of any school that's not in that group, but who does not meet the criterion for if they have 15% or more that are not fully credentialed. But I'll get that. We'll put that information in the follow-up. Last couple things I want to point out here before we move to data. My CDE Connect, just a reminder, SARC coordinators, all the data now that has been released should be mostly populated. If you're using a third-party vendor, which I know a lot of people do, just know you don't have to. The My CDE Connect, it'll populate it all there for you. So that's an option. You don't have to pay for the SARC. You can get it for free through the state. And if you don't have them, you can have as many as 2 SARC coordinators at each site within your district. They just have to go into the My CDE portal, click on the registration link, and then request access as a site level coordinator. Or if you want to be a district level coordinator, you can have as many as 2 at that level as well. And those will go once you register, it'll send an email that'll get sent to either your superintendent or if you're charter school an administrator, or if you're if you have a main authorizer or alternate authorizer, that person can also sign off on those. So I'll stop there for any other questions in the room or in the chat. Anything seems okay. And now some
Wait,
CalPads.
I'm so sorry.
Yep.
There's a question that says all data is still not populated into My CDE Connect. I reached out to SARC at CDE and data will be populated during the month of December.
All right. Thank you for that update. That is good to know. Yeah. So, and by the way, I put the link in there because I think this is one of those things that there is the SARC data elements file. It's like, what am I responsible for populating and what is the CDE going to automatically populate? Because sometimes you're not seeing things. But things like the participation in the physical fitness test still has to be uploaded into the SARC by each school. So, and it has a format and everything. So, but there are just a handful of things that are left that you have to auto-populate, as well as any kind of school overview. But take a look at that document because it's really helpful in knowing what other data you may have to load yourself. So some CalPads data updates. We've talked about this before. I talk about it with like CalPads Network, but this is new this year. Last year, we didn't have anybody identified. So in 2023-24, every LEA and I should say charter schools are exempt from this. Although if charter schools were not getting their data, if they're not getting it certified in time or submitted in time, their authorizing agency could actually support them. But this only applies to districts and county offices. But if your district did not submit your or certify your data on time for any of the 3 submission windows, they would have been identified last year for this new 1-year technical assistance. There are constricting circles at each year that goes by. And this year there was talk about making it, if you still have fatal errors, as of this recommended date that you have no fatal errors, then you would be considered. That seems to have kind of been tabled for now. I haven't heard any confirmation. I think that the California Superintendent's um, organization was actually trying to talk that one off because it was like, especially with the new special ed data requirements, it makes it very difficult. But then moving forward, having accurate, correct, and complete data by the deadline is critical. And the plan is so that it's not just, oh, you're bad, but we're going to provide you with some additional support. So our CalPads network and another things that we're doing with CSIS and CDE to support our LEAs are considered among these universal supports. And if a district were identified for this additional technical assistance, we have a more refined version. But for this year, this in 23-24, the certified data, nobody got called out. It was fine. This year, the submission deadlines again will be a factor. Again, I don't think that because as of now, I know we still have some fatal errors out there, and I don't think that we're going to have all these districts identified. Could be, but I don't think so. Then in 25-26, so this is when it gets really tight, is the accurate data. And I know I've talked to a couple districts where we've had some relatively small things, some relatively big things, and I know from historically, even my own district, we had some errors, right? And so accurate data would be, or inaccurate data more accurately, would be a cause for identification for this additional support. And what might that look like? How that might be identified? To be honest, it's mostly going to be self-reported. That's often what happens. Sometimes it's pretty evident when your A through G completion rate drops 40% in 1 year, things like that. When you have a major shift in your um, student groups that it doesn't look accurate, right? So things like that could be in the future grounds for getting this additional support provided. I shouldn't make it sound terrible. You'd be working with me. I mean, I think it's going to be great, but that's me. But so what they're doing this year, this is coming from CSIS, which is the state's technical provider. They really want to be able to address the reasons for eligibility, provide an overview of some data management practices. Like, what are you doing with your data management? And this is a constantly reinforced theme that I tell all my CalPads network members. You can't do this alone. You need additional support. You need multiple eyes on this data, and you need the people who are closest to the data to look at it. So I'm imploring everybody in this room and on Zoom, if you're not already supporting your CalPads person, please do. It really is imperative that they have other supports. And it's really hard when you're the only person. You have very little leverage oftentimes as a CalPads person to make people look at your data. It was often given to me and say, look at this data. And I'm like, what am I looking at? Like, I have no idea. That's the kind of support we're going to try to continue to provide is here's what you should be looking at. And here's what would be a red flag if you saw it so that we will get more, more better data. But that's the CSIS folks have put together some self-evaluation tools. They've also got a root cause analysis, and they have a data management needs assessment. All of these are uploaded. They've got a new support page, the CSIS Universal Supports Toolkit, and we've got a preview of the self-evaluation tool. I think it's fantastic. I think what I've asked of them is that they provide county offices as well as LEAs with a webinar or something to talk about how to implement it, because it's going to be something like, I could do this. Who do I need to have in my LEA take this, right? It's not going to be relevant for everybody, but who should be taking this, and it's a self-evaluation to kind of figure out where you are. Other things that are coming up, I mentioned this last time, but there's been another. This is the CCGI, which is this California College Guidance Initiative. And this is a new requirement. There's a new flash that just came out, I think, last week that I've linked here, and it's in Canvas. And it basically relates to the creation of these basic accounts, which have value in and of themselves, as well as how to access those, and then the compliance with regards for financial aid. You may want to take a look at that flash just to make sure you're familiar. What is happening, just so a reminder of what is happening. So the state at the LEA level, there's a Senate bill that requires that by January 1st of 2026, every LEA will have entered into this data sharing agreement with this California College initiative. And this will allow you to take advantage of this great student transcript tool that will do an analysis designed for California colleges. So to look at the data to make sure it's accurate, and it allows students to be able to monitor in real time once they have these partner accounts where they stand in terms of meeting their A through G requirements. But there's all sorts of other tools that I'll talk about, some of the benefits. And so at the state level, they're automatically creating these basic accounts. So if you logged in now, you should be able to set up these basic accounts. And that gives, there's some advantages to that, what students are able to see. It's not that transcript level data yet, but it's going to be really helpful. So the benefit for you, why you should care. So these UC CSU tools, super helpful. And again, I maybe mentioned this a couple times because it's been consuming my life. As someone who is currently getting students ready for college, when I had to, you manually enter all their courses. And if you're applying to a UC or a Cal State, click of a button and it's all uploaded. All the transcript information is loaded for you. So that's a huge benefit that I can't say would be, from a student and parent perspective, great. It gives you access to verify course, whether the courses meet A through G. And this is really beneficial at the district level. And I know my colleague Stephen saw this in their case. The real benefit is in some ways the district, because it forces all these, all your courses to run through this filter. Does this meet A through G? Is it on the UC doorways as an A through G approved course? It'll clean up the A through G data, correct?
Well, you'll be doing that work, but yes, it
Yes,
will.
you'll be doing the work. But once it's done, it'll be accurate. It'll definitely increase the accuracy, and in the long run, it's for the student's benefit, because nothing worse than taking a course that you think is A through G approved turns out not to be A through G approved, and you have to.
Absolutely. So one revelation is that you can have a higher A through G rate as analyzed by the only authority on A through G rate, like you see OP. And that's an important takeaway. Is when you create that accuracy, you can have increase in rate.
Yeah, and benefit for the college career indicator on the dashboard with that as well. One more thing, or two more things, I should say. This webinar I mentioned, the CALPADS and Assessment Working Together webinar, which took place just maybe a week and change ago. I don't remember now. That is not very clear. There is a link on there, though. There is a Padlet that includes a recording of that. Sorry that that's kind of murky, but the link is in Canvas as well. Highly recommend that. I thought it was pretty informative and got into some details most people know, but just if you are an assessment person, some of the things you can be doing now to work with your CalPads person to make the opening of the LPAC and the CAS windows much freer of drama, something to that effect. But I think the message is good. The resources are great. And then finally, this is one thing I really want to plug to this room and online. We've been doing this series with our colleague, Rebecca Aguilar from the Fresno County Superintendent's Office. She's phenomenal. She is a former counselor. She also knows CalPads because that's how she kind of got into CalPads. And she's been delivering for many years a lot of great kind of how-tos about accessing, how to look at your data in CalPads, not from a CalPads person's perspective, not somebody speaking CalPadian, but rather from like just an administrator who needs to know. And so she's doing the statewide series. We're hosting the series here. The third in the series is April 1st, and it's going to be very specific and preparing for the dashboard. So this is the accountability wheelhouse, right? If you or someone you know has a primary responsibility for the dashboard, or if you have a counselor or maybe an assistant principal at a high school who looks at this data to make sure it's accurate, this is for you. And it's really not designed for the CalPads people, although they're welcome to attend. We've sold out the last two. We have one come up next Monday that's sold out, and we've had great turnout, and it's usually been teams of people. So this one, though, put it on your radar, because I think this one will be really one to join in. Again, we'll share the resources, but being there in person and going through the activities is probably the best, right? Because she has you walk through some activities where you look at things and you determine, is this accurate, is this not? And it's how you learn to spot the red flags in your data. So the flyer is posted and the registration link is also here. It will sell out, and then they create a waiting list. If we could get a bigger room, we would have more people. And that's it for accountability, but I'll stop for any additional questions. Yes. Yeah, so the question was LTELs for determination around TSI, even if they meet the criteria of all 5 indicators, the majority of which are red, they don't count. That's correct, because it's based on 2 years worth of data for a student group. So they had to have met it in 2 years, and they weren't on the dashboard last year. So they're the one student group who wouldn't make a school eligible for TSI. Thank you.
Question from the chat. Will the ESSA file be released next week? The website says still coming. What does your crystal ball say?
My
Evan?
crystal ball says there's the CDE has also been doing these really nice accountability afternoons. They're Wednesdays, I think, at 3. I'll put the link in the follow-up. But they have one next Wednesday, December 11th. And I feel like they're going to drop around that date so that they can pat themselves on the back for, having done a great job and getting it out so early. It is a lot of calculating. That's why it takes so long, but they're trying to get it out. And I'm kind of hopeful that I think it's going to come out definitely before people go to break, because they know people would like to have that verified. All right. Well, let's take, for those of you home, get up, stretch your legs. For those of you in the room, get up and stretch your legs, grab some water, grab a snack. We're going to take a 5-minute break and return at, I have no clock here. We'll return at 5 after 10.
All right, we're gonna get started with the assessment updates here after the break. All right. So most of these assessment updates are going to be from the Regional Assessment Network meeting that was held November 20th. Updates provided by Malvang and ETS and CDE. I'll leave most of the ETS updates for Marcus, and he'll speak as well. So I believe he's available to do that. But we'll talk briefly about internal formative assessment updates. I'll interject a few summative pieces of information. Then we'll have a guest, Deb Atwell, who is LACO, and she's going to talk about performance test embedded learning for science, and the performance task bank, and then Sarah's going to talk about some achievement level descriptors that are a big topic of discussion as of this last Board of Education meeting. So, or actually the last 2 Board of Education meetings. So we'll look at that. Starting with interim and formative assessment updates. There is good news in terms of your arguments for joining the bandwagon, and that's once again interim assessment mid-year counts are up. That means more of us are utilizing those interim assessments at this point in the year. They've gone up year over year over year as the availability has gone up. You've got great use of initial use of the science test and LPAC tests. Of course, those are the most new assessments and have the lowest use, probably because of that. But great use of those as well. There have been some questions since the new science tests have been so popular. There's been really positive feedback about the CAST interim assessments. There have been questions about if there are plans for more CAST interims in the future. Currently, the answer is there's no additional CAST interim assessments planned under the current contract. CD is glad that they're useful for educators, and good to see that these numbers are rising, and so many are being utilized. Because interims are often used as a dry run or a first run for accommodations designated supports, I want to highlight that the CASP student needs matching tool is new, and it's
a new quick reference guide designed to help educators and IEP teams to identify appropriate designated supports and accommodations for students in the classroom and on task assessments. So it's a document that's available to you to categorize and available designated supports accommodations and groups based on needs of students. So another tool in addition to the ISAP tool available to you as you're working with your IEP teams or working with individual students in a gen ed setting for 504 plans or even with business support.
Okay. On the summative front, CD is going to be developing a science participation rate report similar. So we're looking at participation on the interims in this diagram or this discussion. On the summative front, on the summative front, CD is going to develop a science participation rate report similar to what's been used for ELA and math. That is a science CAST and CAA for science participation rates should be added to the Testing Accountability California Schools Dashboard and the System Support School Dashboard additional reports data. That means that you'll have a chance to see the rate of testing at the end of the year, in addition to your internal reports that you're managing and ensuring you're reaching your percentages. Tools for teachers. There are, of course, a reminder that there's lessons plans aligned with the ELA math and science standards. No current LPAC resources, but those science standards have lessons planned aligned, I believe, in the 90s, hundreds or 700s for ELA and math, we want to highlight the professional learning resources. So ELD professional learning resources are new. There's LPAC task types are highlighted in these professional learning resources. Those are for familiarizing your educators. So if you are responsible for running your EL programs or responsible for developing assessment literacy for your teacher teams, it's something that you can use to show how to provide support to students who are English learners utilizing these resources. So those are resources that are implemented by a training facilitator. So if you're looking for something to develop your teacher's understanding of these resources, those are in tools for teachers as well. Of course, since those are in tools for teachers, you will need to have a login. Most of the individuals in this group would have a LEA coordinator role, which would give you an appropriate login in that single sign-on. Coming soon are also ELA and math lean lessons. I mean, shorter lessons in ELA math. So expanding that availability and some enhancements to the navigation and homepage. Of course, the interim assessment lookup tool is new as well. In terms of opportunities for your district, Smarter Balanced Teaching and Learning Innovation Award is something that CD wanted to highlight. They want your LEA to apply and seek up to $10,000 to be awarded to your LEA here in this application process or this award process. So there's a February or January 5th initial application due, and there's more details on an award website. I believe we have a link that's available within the presentation. I will drop a link after I sit down as well into the chat. All right, some upcoming information. There's a CAS student needs matching tool we talked about, and that has dropped as we approach February 1st, 2025. CD ETS is planning to send out an updated RFEP eligibility list in mid-January 2025 to LEAs to show their progress. on reclassification of students who have a level 4 summative LPAC or level 3 summative alternate LPAC, so that this will also be shared with the RAN and regional EL specialists at the same time, and then a second send in late March 2025. So this is something we saw initiated in the past, and saw emails go out to you this year, suggesting a potential opportunity to reclassify students. Of course, criteria is 2, 3, and 4 are all locally determined. Criteria 1 would be the only set in stone criteria for reclassification. But of course, if you're looking at Evan's data earlier on LTALs, we know the importance of ensuring that students are appropriately reclassified and done so in a timely manner, so that they aren't tested with an LPAC when they should have been reclassified. So good to look at that before the LPAC window opens. So the purpose of that is to make sure those processes are in place. Dyslexia screener. We're not going to talk specifically about the dyslexia screener, but California is going to be is requiring all schools to screen K through 2 students for reading difficulty, including dyslexia, beginning into the 25-26 school year, using a state-approved universal screener. And you'll see that by December 31st of this year, 2024, a panel of experts will vote to approve a list of screening instruments. So statewide literacy office is leading that work, and their website is on the CDE's webpage.
I would also say I added our colleagues in the Reading Language Arts and Literacy unit gave us the newsletter from the state literacy group. It's posted on Canvas. It's in the modules. I didn't post a link, but we can add that. But it actually has a nice little section on the timeline and everything. We've covered it here before. They said by next week on December 12th, they actually expect to have the approved list. They'll have more details next week, so look forward to that.
Yeah, so a little bit earlier than that expected date. Nobody's in the office on December 31st, so December 12th would be the effective date, I suppose. Okay, blueprint changes for the California Spanish assessment. So you know that the state seal by literacy is one of your CCI measures, or ways of reaching partial CCI, and California Spanish assessment was originally designed to help identify, be an assessment that could be used to identify students for the state seal by literacy. It was never usable for that because it didn't have all components required by code to be usable for that assessment. For state seal by literacy, you would typically use AP tests or something internally determined, or IB tests. It is, of course, being released in the 24-25 test administration as a fully operational test that is not specifically named for use in seal by literacy, but hopefully it will become part of those named requirements. The highlight here is that there's going to be no local scoring by the LEA for California Spanish assessment. That means no required scoring training for LEAs, and no additional need to train your teachers. That will be scored by ETS, by the contractor. So in terms of speaking and writing constructed response items, just like your AP, you will be able to rely upon the testing vendor in order to test those. Of course, you get paid to test with the CSA, and you are paying for those other assessments. RSVP, I'll let Marcus speak to if he's so prefers, but there's going to be a comparison report made available to you as an LEA who's in RSVP or is doing the rotating score validation process this year. Look out for that. Looking for discrepancies from your original scores compared to ETS scoring on the writing. That's for LPAC. Summative test assignments after initial LPAC administration. A reminder that you need to test within the first 30 calendar days of student enrollment, and to prioritize testing in those 30 days over ensuring that you have assigned a student a alternate assessment if that might be in the cards. So first 30 calendar days would be your emphasis in terms of what your priority is. And then domain exemptions. Reminder that there is a domain exemption tool available to you to utilize when selecting summative LPAC domain exemptions. Also for the initial LPAC. There's 3 upcoming trainings this week from ETS and CDE. What's new for the LPAC? Tuesday, December 3rd, that's today, 2 to 4. December 8th, the NCT webinars from 3 to 4. December 10th, the coffee session from 2 to 3. And then some deadlines coming up. December 6th, alternate LPAC and summative LPAC AST is required by December 6th. And the November 1st, the LPAC paper, pencil testing form and writing domain ordering opened, and that deadline comes up here on December 20th. With that, I'm going to hand it over to our colleague, Deb Atwell, who is a coordinator here at Los Angeles County Office of Education, and is managing a STEM special project.
I recognize so many of your faces because I used to be a coordinator in the assessment unit prior to moving to curriculum and instruction and heading the math unit for a few years. So my name is Deborah Atwell. I also see a lot of new, fresh faces. So welcome, and thank you for giving me a few minutes of your time today. I'm excited to tell you about a new project that has come to LA County Office of Ed regarding science and support of science performance assessment in the classroom. Let me go ahead and get started. If I walk this way, is it going to make the microphone go off? I don't think so. Okay. This looks a little different. Let me just familiarize myself with it. Okay. So I am here. I am now the project director of the STEM Special Projects Unit, and we are overseeing 2 major grants for LA County Office of Ed that deal with science and mathematics. The first is the Cal MSCS grant, Math Science Computer Science grant, which I know, Sal, you've got a team participating in for East Los Angeles. Rosemead is participating, San Gabriel. So thank you for that. It's really exciting. We're really looking at how we can shift instruction in classrooms around inquiry over the next 3 to 5 years. And the other project is the one that I'm here to talk to you about today, and that's the PTEL grant, or the Performance Task for Embedded Learning project. So in June of this year, Senate Bill 153 appropriated $7 million to the LA County Office of, came from the general fund from the governor to the superintendent of instruction for California. And then it was allocated to the Los Angeles County Office of Education for the development of a statewide repository of high quality NGSS aligned performance assessments in grades K through 12. this is really important because it's not only the performance assessments that you see, the standalone performance assessments that you might see on an interim or summative assessment, but this covers the full range of types of performance assessments, all the way to the very basic, like constructed response, which is a type of performance assessment, all the way to a long-term project that might be happening over a series of months, right? Where students are collecting data, they're pursuing research, and creating an action plan for change. So this task bank will house performance assessments that cover the full spectrum of performance assessments we see. Those are not all performance assessments that you'll see on a summative assessment, but they are different types of performance assessments that can prepare students in the classroom for the type of requirements or for the performance assessment on the summative assessment. The intention of this task bank, it's intended to be used by our local educational agencies, all of you, charters in our districts, and educators in California to support inquiry-based instruction and assessment. And this is really unique and really important. So I want to pause here for a second. When we think of assessment, we often think of large-scale assessment, also maybe the use of the intermittent assessment. And then there's the assessments that teachers do in the classroom that are typically aligned to their textbooks, right? And they may support or not support interim and summative assessment. But the importance here is to see assessment not only as a way of gathering student performance and progress data, but also as a tool to shift instruction. And we know that college and career readiness is requiring students to develop the skills necessary in science and math to apply what they know to the real world. This is very focused, inquiry-based type of learning, very different from a direct instruction, right, that we see typically dominates classroom practice. And so the tool bank is also designed to be, or the task bank is also designed to be an educative tool for use by educators and your districts. So two purposes. One, we want to really think about how we can support teachers with inquiry in science and that type of instruction, and then also a high quality task bank rather than pulling them from resources that may not be reputable. And then finally, the reason LACO got this grant is because we were early, we had a queer grant back in 17, I think it went from 2017 to 2019. And that was for the Performance Task Development Project. How many of you were involved or knew about the Performance Task Development Project? No one in here? Okay. Many districts from across LA County participated in the writing of performance tasks. We were guided by the Stanford task writers and also the WestEd task writers in math and science. And so we have a local task bank, which it's not linked in this slide, but it should be linked, I think, in the materials, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right, Stephen? And but the task bank has both math and science performance assessments that can be used formatively and for instruction in the classroom. So, sorry, the formatting is a little wacky, but two things I want to say. What we're doing right now, we have 1 year to do two things in this grant. One is to design and develop the task bank for the state. So LACO will be housing this repository of performance assessments, grades K through 12. And for that, we'll be looking for a partner statewide that will create a digital platform for the state that's capable of hosting this library of curriculum embedded performance tasks. Again, these are not necessarily preparation for the summative assessment. The goal here is to have performance assessment in science embedded in teacher instructional units. And so that's the key here. These are curriculum embedded performance assessments that will be aligned to teachers' curriculum. Of course, the platform is going to be accessible and free to all LEAs and educators in California. It should be compatible with all devices We're going to have a friendly user interface, very similar to Tools for Teachers, that allows for easy navigation, for bookmarking, for returning back to units, all different types of search functions and filters and different sorting options. And then, of course, we want secure technology that's going to support high traffic and data storage. The other piece of building this task bank, which I really want to highlight, if you look down on bullets, on bullet 2, they're not going to just be organized by the standards or the performance expectation. They are actually going towards that goal of using this as an educative tool for educators. They're going to be organized by pedagogy, small group interaction, large group interaction, skills around the SEPs, disciplinary core ideas. So the key here is this is designed as a tool for teachers to reflect on how they are using performance assessment to inform teaching and learning in their classrooms. And that's key. It's not just housing a bunch of tasks that are going to be useful, but it's getting teachers to reflect on how they're teaching. If we pass out a performance assessment and we say, here, do it in the classroom, where is the support and the scaffolding for our English language learners, for our students with disabilities, et cetera? So we're really designing this tool bank to be a tool that supports teachers with the use of these assessments authentically in their classrooms. Questions about that? Any questions? The other piece, the second piece, is going to be the focus on the tasks that are in the task bank. So right now we have access to about 600 performance assessments that were written by a federal think tank, a coalition of community of practice members around performance assessments from all different states in the United States. We'll be combing through those tasks to make sure they're applicable to California contexts. And we will do a gap analysis of those tasks, meaning essentially that we'll see where we have coverage in all the grade levels and for all the performance expectations. And following that gap analysis, we'll be contracting with another entity to develop and design performance assessments to fill those gaps in our bank. Of course, as part of that, I think which one of the bullets is here? I think third bullet here, or second bullet. The goal here is to collaborate with educators in the design of those tasks, and also that they be vetted with our students in LA County to ensure usage, accessibility, equity, and usage in LA County and for the whole state, since we're such a good microcosm of all the different types of students that we have in California. With regard to this also, again, we're really focusing on pupil learning, not just collecting data to see where students are, but how do we design teaching and learning to bring more students into science, engage them in inquiry, and have this experience, develop their skills prior to an interim or summative assessment. So again, there's going to be specific tools that will focus educators on how to use these tasks well in the classroom to ensure equity and engagement in this work. The important piece here is really how do we support teachers to shift pedagogy or to balance pedagogy in their classrooms so students engage in real-world phenomena in science and develop their critical reasoning skills, their vocabulary around these real-world phenomena to make change in our world. And that's key. That focus on instruction is key, and that's a big piece for the design of this task bank. So I'm going to leave it here. I just wanted to introduce you to the task bank and the goals for this first phase. There will likely be professional development for districts, statewide professional development. But I want to be clear that right now we're in the first phase. Only the first phase of this has been funded, which is the creation of the bank and the populating the bank with high quality performance assessments. But I think we can look on the horizon for good professional development around how we can support teachers with science inquiry and instruction in their classrooms. All right, well, I hope to come some other times this year and give some updates on how we might effectively use some of these tasks. I can give you also a little spotlight on some of the tasks that we're highlighting and looking at in the future. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Deb, and welcome back to Dan.
Thanks, Deb. All right, so you may or may not have heard, but there's been some discussion around the reporting achievement level descriptors. We're all very familiar with this. This is what's put on our students' SSRs. However, back in September in 2024 at the State Board of Education meeting, they released this document. And this document really was intended to provide more clarity around level 2. And that level 2 is not below standard because our assessments currently do not assess below grade level. So it's hard for them to say that the students are below grade level if they're scoring a level 2. So then the question became, what do the students' performance levels really mean? We have our current labels: exceeded, met, nearly met, which leads people to believe they're nearly at grade level, and not met, which leads people to believe they are below grade level. So they're proposing some new labels. Advanced, proficient would stay, but level 2 is foundational. These students have demonstrated a foundational understanding of the grade level content. And level 1, they originally started with inconsistent. A student may have answered several questions correctly, but they're demonstrating an inconsistent grasp of grade level content. Then a recently proposed definition is level 1 is more developing. One of the reasons they're doing this is they received a lot of feedback from a lot of interest holders saying, we need more transparency about what grade level performance really is. There are a lot of concerns with labeling inconsistent for level 1, so changing it to potentially developing. And level 2 is missing language about how students may require additional further development to demonstrate their knowledge and skills in, rather than really kind of hammering that level 2. A lot of us drew that line at level 3 and said at or above grade level and below. And they really want to clarify that that is not accurate. But we need more family and interest holder input. So the next steps is they'd like to reach out to those stakeholders or interest holders, and they're going to be conducting some focus groups. They'll be working to analyze those to really revamp those levels. They're going to provide a preview of recommended changes, hopefully at the December meeting, hopefully, and the proposed changes will be going forward. There was a lot of momentum on this, and it was thought that this would be approved at the most recent State Board of Education meeting. However, lots of people spoke up and said, we need more information. We need to survey more people. We need to get more input on this. So they're providing an agenda item to be providing the proposed items at a January State Board of Education meeting, which probably will not be enough time to update all of the SSRs for the next school year. So what do you think? Going from exceeded to advanced, going from met to proficient, going from nearly met to foundational, and going from not met to developing. We'd actually like you to put into chat or have a quick discussion at your table about what you think about these proposed ideas and share out, because they are looking for input and we will help to share that input. So let's just do a quick 2-minute chat. All right, in the interest of time, we're gonna actually take all the ones from chat And then we'll be asking all of the people in the room in our afternoon session to quick write some of your ideas down so that we can capture those. But in the interest of getting to our good buddy Marcus, who's waiting, I'm going to go very, very quickly. There is a parent and student survey form. So please share this so that we can get some actual live feedback. They'll be doing this is for parents and students. And the first question is, are you a parent or a student? And if you're not, you're kicked out of the survey. So let's go try and get this into the correct hands. But from there, they're going to be actually doing live focus groups with people to get more information. So share this information because we want to make sure that we have as many stakeholders and interest holders information as humanly possible. All right, we're going to pause on this and we're going to head over to our good buddy Marcus.
Marcus, you there?
Hello, assessment team. How's everybody doing this morning?
We're all doing well. Thanks for joining
Great.
us.
No problem. Let me go ahead and share a screen here. I just got a couple things to go over. I have a little bit of a presentation here for everybody. Good morning, everybody who is in attendance. Hope you all are well. Just give me a brief moment. So for those of you who don't know me, I am the Region 11 Success Agent. I also oversee Region 3 with my counterpart, Dina Becerra. She primarily focuses on Region 3 while I focus on Region 11. So just a couple of things to go over today. So if you haven't done so already, please feel free to join and access our newly designed CASP and LPAC website. I've went ahead and put the manuals page up here. They can be very helpful through any event, whether that be adding users, test assignments, updating student demographic information, anything like that. If you have any questions or you'd like to get a reach of me directly, my email address, which is my preferred method, is region11@ets.org. Or if you'd like to talk with me directly as well, you can go ahead and the phone number there listed. It'll prompt you actually to select a region. If you just press region 11 or 11 on the keypad, it'll take you directly to me. Then I'm also available via chat as well. Typically, it starts with our chatbot, Anita, but you can be directed to myself as well if you need to speak with me on any urgent matter. So just a couple of initial LPAC reminders that we have coming up. Stephen did mention that as well. So the answer booklets for RSVP, and anytime after the 31st, they would have needed to be tested on or before October 31st. And then those must be shipped to ETS by December 9th. They must be sent via UPS. As long as they're by that date, they will be scored. If you have any supplemental material orders through the ongoing initial LPAC process, please make sure that when you're placing those orders to allow at least for 10 to 14 business days to arrive. That's standard with any supplemental order that you place, whether that be initial LPAC or the upcoming summative as well. As Stephen mentioned as well, the current primary test material order for summative LPAC is currently open at this time, and it will be closing on December 20th. If you order within your primary test material order window, those orders will arrive by the week of January 13th. One thing I do advise, if you haven't done so already, I know some LEAs could be potentially closed during holiday break as well or other dates. If you want to complete the non-delivery date section in TOMS under the order section, please do so at this time so that the orders are not sent back to us directly. Just gives us our shipping team a better idea of when to actually send those orders out to your LEAs. And then the supplemental test material order window, after that closes on the 20th for the primary window, it's going to be from January 13th to May 9th. And again, please allow 10 to 14 business days once the order has been placed and a tracking number has been generated in order to arrive at your LEA. Just a couple of CASP reminders, since we're going to be upon the heels of the new year here coming up. Just so you know, any LEAs that have not set up their CASP test administration window, the deadline for that was actually December 1st, this past Sunday. If you have not accessed your CASP test administration window, please feel free to reach out to me either either email, phone, or chat. I'll be able to help set that up, put in your non-instructional dates, everything like that, and then set up your window. So fortunately, if you try to access it at this point, you won't be able to because we have now passed that December 1st deadline. When it comes to CAST specifically for the CASP and Smarter Balance assessments, please note that grades 5, 8, and high school grade levels, whether that be 10 or 11 or 12, will be assigned to test. So just so the LEAs are aware, you have the option to assign grade 10 or 11th while they're in high school. However, grade 12, if they had not taken it in 10th or 11th grade of the prior administration years, they will automatically be assigned. So just be aware of that as well. If you have 12th graders that did not take that in 10th or 11th grade of the prior administration years when they were in that grade level, they will automatically be assigned to the CAST. So as you've set up your users, you want to make sure that those users that you set up have completed their required security forms. I've been getting a few calls and emails from the field regarding users that aren't able to access the correct tests. And this goes for both the initial LPAC and the upcoming CASP. If they do not complete their required security forms after they've been assigned a role within TOMS, when they log into the TA interface, they are only going to see the interim assessments available. They will not see the initial LPAC, the initial alternate LPAC at this time because those forms have not been completed. So they need to make sure that when they're logging in and set up their login credentials as well, that they complete those security forms and allow at least 30 to 60 minutes after completing those forms in order for the appropriate tests to appear. So as an LEA coordinator and site coordinator as well, you have access to a report within TOMS called the Security Forms and Remote Administration Status Report. So you can always check to see which users have actually completed the forms based on the role they've been given and who has not completed those forms. When you download said report, you'll actually receive a spreadsheet of this information. It'll actually give you the timestamp for the date and time in which that form was signed. So please note that the test security agreement is usually typical for LEA level coordinators or LEA level roles, while the user roles only have the test security affidavit, as you can see some of the differences in the screenshot provided. So anytime you need to check that, just use again the remote test administration, security forms and remote test administration report as well, just to verify those users. So for the initial ongoing LPAC eligibility for students, please make sure that the following fields, the ELAS field or the English Language Acquisition Status field and the primary language field reflect TBD, and then the primary language field reflecting anything other than English, excuse me. If those fields are not reflected, those students will not be eligible for the initial LPAC. So if they enroll in your LEA and based on the home language survey, once you've updated that in CALPADS, please make sure that your CALPADS administrator is pushing that information through so that it reflects in TOMS. Again, they will not be eligible for the initial LPAC unless they have TBD listed as their ELAS, and then any other language than English that includes ASL as well for their primary language listed. When it comes to the initial LPAC again as well, there is a component for grades 3 through 12. Remember, K through 2 tests online for writing, but for 3 through 12, there is a hand scoring component that goes along with that. So once the writing has been completed for grades 3 through 12, you can always double check the initial THSS or Teacher Hand Scoring System Summary Report to verify what hand scoring is currently outstanding and has not been completed. So that's within TOMS as well. LEA coordinators and site coordinators will have access to those reports, and it's the initial LPAC THSS Summary Report. About that. There we go. Now, this is something I've come across for both initial and summative LPAC, for specifically for the speaking domain is something that I've come across. So when the speaking domain is administered, please ensure all of your test examiners are completing that speaking domain and it's showing as submitted and reported on the completion status reports. Because what's occurring is they are actually stopping at a point within the speaking domain itself, accessing the speaking DEI with the responses recorded. And then when they close that speaking DEI, it locks in place the speaking domain for the initial and summative LPAC. What happens is they keep appearing on the report as well as still needing to complete the speaking domain. So please make sure that your test examiners understand that when they stop that test, they're actually closing the test and not just leaving it in a pause status before entering the speaking DEI information, because it is locking in place that speaking domain. There's actually instructions in the DFA as well for how to stop the test if the student has not been responding or no correct responses, and hitting the end test section of that speaking domain. Now this goes for both CASP and LPAC. This is when it comes to assigning either the alternate assessment and or accommodations for a student. So universal tools and designated supports do not require an IEP or 504. However, accommodations do require the 504 and our IEP to be present in the student's CALPADS information. So that reflects in TOMS. So that's going to be CALPADS special education and special education for testing. Those both must reflect yes in order for the student to be assigned the alternate assessment for CASP or LPAC, and or for them to be either have accommodations added manually or through a file upload. If both of those fields do not reflect that, when you attempt to manually upload when you attempt to upload via file for the accommodations, you'll actually generate errors because those two fields do not reflect yes. Same thing goes as when you try to manually add them, they will be grayed out until both of those fields say yes. So this is just some brief information for starting a test session. So let's say your users have created their login credentials, they've signed all the correct forms and submitted those. They'll be able to start a test session just by accessing the TA interface. So when they access the TA interface, all of the tests based on the role that they were assigned are going to have all of them listed there as well. Within this same field, and this applies for both interims and for summative for both CASP and LPAC, they should be checking the test settings prior to approving a student. So that's going to be denoted by the eye or the eyeball icon in the actual TA interface, which is on the next slide here. So any test administrators, and we just used an ELA computer adaptive test as an example here, they're going to be able to access and see the details of the test settings. Now, if they see any test settings that should or should not be there, they want to make sure that they are not approving the student before moving forward, because if they approve the student and the student either starts a test with an accommodation they needed or did not need, that will result in a stairs case and having to reset the test. And resetting via stairs without having the correct test settings, that is applicable only to summative. That is not applicable to interim assessments. So please make sure that your test examiners and administrators are checking that prior to approving the student. It'll just save you a lot of time with doing stairs when it comes to summative testing. This is an important report that typically I like including so that all users, both site and LEA level users, can use. There is a completion status tab under the link section within TOMS. It's a bit different from the report section and the completion status you see there. The completion status under the reports, those are typically updated nightly. So if you have a student that tests one day and you're trying to verify later that afternoon if they've completed that entire test, when you go into the report section for the completion status report, it's not going to update until the next morning. However, this completion status under the link section is going to give you more real-time focus on student completion. So when you access the completion status, it'll open a new tab within your browser. Now, there are two things we're going to overview today, the plan and manage testing, and then the search by SSID feature. So plan and manage testing just allows you to search completion rates and the completion statuses by various filters, as opposed to the search by SSID, where you could type in, I believe it's up to 20 SSIDs, as long as you're using those commas. You'll be able to see the status of any student in progress, if they're in a paused status, expired, anything like that. So first, we're going to take a look at the plan and manage testing feature. So for those past coordinators and site coordinators have used this in the past, it looks a little bit different, but the searchability and everything is the same. It's laid out a little bit differently. So you have your basic search, which allows you to look for your district and or school. And then you have an advanced search, which allows you to see more of those filters as well. So you can choose your district, school, search the student by their first name or SSID. And then you can actually search by their test, whether that be an interim assessment, a summative assessment, LPAC, anything like that. And you can get as specific as the actual test name that you're looking for. And then the administration year, I believe this is an old screenshot, so it's going to show 2024, 2025. And then you can get as specific as you'd like in the next section by using the 5 different radio buttons. So for the first one, you have students who have, and then when you select on that dropdown, you have the option of have or have not. And then under completed, you'll show completed or started. And then based on which test you've actually selected, it's going to show any opportunity or first opportunity. So any opportunity is usually associated with the interim assessments because there are multiple opportunities to take those. And then for summative, you're going to see just the first opportunity because there's only one opportunity to see those. The second button, you'll be able to see students that have any status and or opportunity in that selected administration. And then you can choose the status of whether it's expired, paused, anything like that in the next drop down. You can search by the student SSID. Again, you can use about 20 SSIDs separated by commas. The fourth is going to be students whose current opportunity will expire. And again, it's based on the test name that you've selected, whether that was a computer adaptive or a performance task. It should allow you to see when it will expire within a certain amount of days. Then for the last radio button, you can actually use the session ID that was generated as well, and then look between a certain subset of dates as well. The next feature, this is the search by SSID feature. I know I worked with some of you in the field already using this filter, but basically it's a little bit different from the plan and manage testing. If you use any SSIDs, you can actually see the progress of a student. You can even see what question they're on. For example, if they're on question 12 of 15, 13 of 15, based on the test that you're looking at, it's going to show any test that the student currently has opened, and it's going to allow you to see whether the test has been reported or submitted, expired, or if it's a restart as well, based on if there was a stairs that was filed for either a reset or a restart for the student. Any questions?
Marcus, I think because of time constraints, if any, I put a note. If anybody has
Sure.
questions, you can drop them in the chat. I think we'll just have you respond after the fact for anything that comes through, just because we kind of gone way long. We have a
Sure.
live session still left. We certainly appreciate you being here to answer the questions as always.
No problem.
And I think we have Sarah, do you want to just plug the one section we got really behind today? I'm not sure how that happened, but we had a couple other things we wanted to share with you, but we may push those into our Wednesdays at 1 meeting in January.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I had put together a security affidavit. As you know, people have to sign those security affidavits in order to access all of the wonderful resources and tools, and especially to give interims. And I had put together I'm going to toot my own horn. It's pretty cool. Go ahead to the next slide. Where's the clicky thing? So there is a wonderful, where's clicky? Oh, I had clicky. There's a wonderful report that comes through TOMS so that you can download and decide who has completed their security affidavits. It's really helpful and very supportive, but it's a lot of columns. So I went ahead and built a dump data here. So it's a Google page and all of this is accessible to you. And we're going to really go through it when we launch Wednesdays at 1, January 29th, Wednesdays at 1. Woo, woo. Please join us. But you have access to this right now. There's directions, and on the directions tab, it even has a scribe that tells you how to get into TOMS and how to get this report. Share it with whoever is in charge of this information. But what's super cool about it is dump data here. All you do is copy and paste what the state gives you. You dump it right there. And all you have to do is set up a filter function. There's directions on how to set up a filter function. If you don't know how, ChatGPT can show you. And you just set up your schools. And that way, everything goes to the different schools, and you can tell the principal, just go look at your school, and it'll say yes or no. It's also conditionally formatted so that you can see exactly who's done and who's not. And while I'd love to do Homer Simpson's demo time, we don't have enough time. So January. Oh, it's not there. Okay. I had a cool picture of January. So in January, we will do demo time. Back to you, Evan.
So you stay up there.
Oh, I stay up here.
I think that is everything. And just a couple professional learning activities to start our schedule. I know we got actually a request now, but if you have anybody you know who wants to be part of DAAN or should be at these meetings, make sure you forward our link to the flyer, which is in the Canvas page. We also have
Wednesdays at 1.
Thank you. Wednesdays at 1. Make sure you put this on your calendar. The whole team joins not every Wednesday at 1. Oh, yeah, I guess starting in January, we'll have a weekly. So primarily focused on assessment, but because it always kind of drifts into accountability every now and then, I'll be there as well as Dr. Weissman.
And Marcus.
And Marcus, yeah, Marcus always joins us for that. And then a few other additional assessment pieces.
Starting in January, we're going to be really diving into the different Smarter Balanced Toolbox or Toy Box. We'll be looking at Content Explorer and some other resources. We'll be taking a session on diving into math performance tasks. In addition to diving into the ones that are available through the state, we'll be looking at some of the ones in the LACO Task Bank and talking about how they can be utilized in different ways rather than plunking them in front of a kid and saying, do this. We'll be doing Dude, Where's My Data? It's just called Where's My Data, but dude, where's my data? When you take a CAST interim, if you don't do the hand scoring, you don't get data. So we're going to be talking about the different ways to handle hand scoring as well as how to do them in different manners so that hand scoring may or may not be needed. Finally, we'll be doing Pin the Tail on the Genre and how to think flexibly about writing and performance tasks, ways of helping support students code switching between the genres that are required when it comes to state testing.
You did that fast. Thank you. For those of you who are in Zoom land, we appreciate your joining us. We will post a recording of this within about 48 hours. And now we're going to shut down and we're going to have a live interactive session. Just so you know, there's literally hundreds of people here. I mean, they are like, it is amazing, but you're missing out. So good luck. We'll see you in February, and we'll get more details out about our February meeting soon. Thanks a lot, everybody, and we'll see you soon. If you're in the room, give us 5 minutes to get set up, and we'll jump right into it.